Welcome, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourselves with your name and where you're calling in from in the chat as you come into the room. Welcome, welcome. Feel free to keep on introducing yourselves. I see Lee from Scottsdale, Gabriella from Colorado, Tamara from Las Vegas, Jimmy from Colorado, Kylie from West Virginia. Welcome, welcome. Okay, and there's everyone. Seeing Georgia, California, Washington, Virginia, New Orleans, Missouri, Orlando, Ohio, Connecticut, Illinois, Delaware. Sorry if I missed you, they're coming in very fast. We'll wait another probably like 60 seconds or so for the waiting room to slow down so no one misses anything. Give it another 30 seconds or so. All right, I think we can go ahead and dive right into things. Welcome, everyone. Please feel free to continue introducing yourselves in the chat as we get started. My name is Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project manager of NLIHC's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. Thank you so much for joining this fourth webinar in our series, Forming Partnerships in Your Community. And again, feel free to keep on introducing yourselves. We know that nonpartisan election work can feel really overwhelming, especially for those of you who are just getting started or diving into this for the first time in 2024. But don't worry, that is why this webinar is here. That is why Our Homes, Our Votes is here. And that is why we're bringing you a panel of wonderful partners today who can support your work and provide some insights on how to collaborate with other organizations in your community to increase your capacity. So this webinar will introduce you to some key community partners that can increase your capacity to register and educate and mobilize voters in your communities. We'll first hear from Selena Gomez, National Outreach Director at Vote Riders, who will share about resources and partnerships available for voter ID assistance. Then we'll hear from Marcos Damian-Noyola, Senior Partnerships Manager at Vote ER, about the connection between healthcare and voting and how Vote ER can support your work. We'll then hear from our Homes, Our Votes intern, Hillary, who recently joined our team and also leads campus voter turnout work at University of Michigan and has some really incredible insights into coalition building. And we'll then conclude with some Q&A for the full panel, and we'll get into the opportunities to get involved with Our Homes, Our Votes beyond being on this webinar, as well as some new resources that we have available to support your work. We can go to the next slide. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and resources will be distributed in our Friday email newsletter, The Connection. And the recording will be posted on the NLIHC YouTube channel by the end of the week. And we can share the link in the chat to subscribe to our newsletter in case you aren't on there already. We also have closed captioning enabled. Thank you so much to our captioner for being here today. Please ask questions using the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. This makes it easier to keep an eye on those questions than if you put them in the chat. So definitely encourage you to use that. Speaking of the chat, we ask that everyone engage thoughtfully and respectfully in the chat and to live by the platinum rule, which means treat others the way they want to be treated, even if that's different from the way you want to be treated. Last but not least, I just wanted to give a reminder that Our Homes, Our Votes is 100% nonpartisan, meaning that we don't endorse or favor specific candidates or political parties. Our goal is to build the voting power of low-income renters so that we can hold all elected officials accountable to prioritize housing justice. And with that, I will hand it over to Selene.
Courtney, thank you so much for that. As Courtney mentioned, I'm Selene Gomez. I'm the National Outreach Director for Vote Writers. And here on the next slide, you'll see that I'm going to cover some items with some background information. We're going to talk about elections, what you need to know, what you can do, and the services that we provide for individuals who need a state identification. So the next slide here, just so you all know, for background, Vote Writers has been around since 2012. We are a national nonpartisan organization that focuses on the voter ID aspect of the voting process. Just to give you an idea, 2012, as you can, if you can go to the next slide. Even though there are 38 out of 50 states that have voter ID laws, and we work in all of those states, we do have staff on the ground in these states that you see here. So if you are actually based in one of these states and want to do something on the ground, we're happy to work with you. But if you're not in these states, we can still work with you. In COVID, we were able to really master being able to provide some resources through partner organizations and being able to still provide the same services and assistance as we have in the past. And again, if you don't see your state here, it doesn't mean that we don't work there. It just means that we may not have a person on the ground, but we do have some really good anchor organizations and volunteer groups that still help us with the voter ID assistance. Next slide. And again, I had mentioned here that there's 38 out of 50 states that have a voter ID law. And the ones that you see in that orangish color, it just, you know, they have been new or stricter laws since the last presidential election. 17 states have changed their voter ID laws, so things that people may have done in the last time they voted may not work this time around. And so we know that there are a lot of people that are being affected by this, and so it's why not only are we creating awareness and educating people, but we're actually helping them get underlying documents like their birth certificate to be able to get a state identification. That we realize, and we do it because of voting, but we also understand it's a holistic approach because sometimes you need it for employment, for housing, and other benefits. Next slide. Now, before I talk about some of the resources, I wanted to share some findings that we did in a research project that we did with the University of Maryland and the Brennan Center for Justice in 2023. Before this, there were some statistics out there, but not necessarily some that were particular to voter ID and the impact that it has in communities. And what the big finding that we had is that about 15% voting age citizens in the United States don't have an unexpired driver's license with their current name and address on it. Using 2020 census number, that translates to over 34.5 million people. You're just talking about people that are 18 and over and that are US citizens. Next slide. Now, to no surprise, there's disproportionate impact, unfortunately, right? The people that are most impacted by voter ID laws and the people that are least likely to have these are Black, Latinx Americans, individuals that don't have a high school diploma or college degree, and individuals with lower annual incomes. One group that I actually want to highlight is Black individuals, 18 to 29. They were actually the ones that were least likely to have an acceptable ID. When asked, there were about 70% that said that they did have a driver's license or a state identification, but out of those 70%, almost half of them said that they didn't have their current name or address on it, so it's not up to date. So they wouldn't, in some states, depending where they live, they still wouldn't be able to use them, unfortunately, to vote. Next slide. Now, also, you know, we did ask about, okay, if people don't have it, why, right? How many people don't have it and what are the reasons? And almost a fifth of individuals without a driver's license or state ID said that there were either bureaucratic or economic factors that they couldn't pay for it. They didn't have the underlying documentation. In some instances, it was financial or legal difficulties like unpaid fines or tickets, or they just didn't have the time to be able to get all the documents needed. Next slide. And then in addition to that, 2 out of every 10 Americans living in a voter are living in a voter ID state again. 38 states have a voter ID law, but about 20% of the people that live in these states do not have a voter, I apologize, an acceptable identification to vote. Next slide. And it's not just having the right documentation, it's also not knowing, right? We asked about if people knew that if there was a voter ID law in their state or not, and more than half of individuals living in states where you do require a photo ID didn't know if they had a voter ID law. And we saw a similar pattern even with individuals that lived in states that don't have a voter ID law. They were still confused and didn't know if they had to provide one or not. So it's just opening our eyes and just having some empirical data behind the work that we're doing that unfortunately people that aren't affected by these laws are still being affected. It's spilling over because there's so much talk about it, and it just creates even more confusion. Next slide. So now that I've given you some background on voter ID, what it's looking like nationally, and just so you know, we are looking to do some oversamples in specific states so then we can actually have state-specific numbers. These numbers I shared with you could not apply to your state specifically. It was out of a national representative sample, but it just gives you an idea of the need out there in the communities. But now that I've talked about this, I'm going to talk about what is it that we can do and some of the resources that we provide for individuals and organizations that are interested in this. Next slide. So the first thing that we have is our voter ID state info pages. We have a website and a specific page for all 50 states plus DC, whether there's a voter ID law or not, because we still get other questions. This is a great resource for you to bookmark because we actually update this in real time. So not only is our priority that we use simple language to where any person could go and say, oh, I do need an ID or I don't need an ID, but we also update it in real time. I pride myself because it's actually been a couple of instances in different states where we have partners that say, hey, your page says something different from the Secretary of State. And it actually turns out that the Secretary of State's page is actually outdated. We're the ones that are most up to date. So this is a great resource. You just go to votewriters.org/ and then your state name, and you can bookmark it there. Next slide. And again, you can go either to votewriters.org and then your state, or you can use this QR code. I think the slides are going to be shared with you after this, so you are free to use it that way as well. Next slide. The next resource that we have is our voter ID information card. So as you can see here, actually on this picture, they're little palm cards. They fold in half. We have them in both English and in Spanish. And again, our website is also in English and in Spanish, so you can get the resources that you need there. And it lists the identifications that you can use to vote and alternatives if there is any. And then it also gives you our helpline number and the ways that we can help. So if you need a copy of your birth certificate, a replacement Social Security card, things like that, we are able to not just cover the cost, but also help you navigate through the process to get them. These are available to everybody. So they're actually, and they're free for 501c3. So if you are a 501c3 and you want this material, you want some printed copies, we actually print and ship these to you completely free of charge. The only caveat is that we don't deliver to PO boxes, but you can order as little as 250 and as many as 100,000 at a time. And as long as you have a plan to distribute them, we're more than happy to provide them to you. They're also downloadable. So if you're doing some kind of text banking, or you're sending out a newsletter and you want to give information, you can also use the digital versions here. And you can, this is a copy. Yes, you can go to the next slide. And this next slide, you'll see essentially how it looks, the front, the middle, and the back. We're using Texas here as an example. You see the list of IDs. There is an alternative in Texas, so it does talk to you about that, the secondary documents you can take. It also tells you when it's been updated. It was updated. All of our states have been updated as of January. There hasn't been one that has changed since then. But if there is, then we make sure to recall those, and we actually contact the organization and send you updated ones if the state has decided to change anything. Next slide. So you can actually order our cards by going to votewriters.org/cards, or you can also use the QR code and you can specify the details. You can order for one state, for multiple states at a time, multiple orders, whatever it is that you need. Next slide. We also do voter ID training. So today we're doing something kind of broad national scope. But if you are interested in having a training, let's say you're in Arizona and you want to talk about the Arizona specific law, then we are happy to break down the law and then provide people with information on the resources that it is that they can take. We can do these both in person or virtually. We can also do joint outreach. So we already have the cards, but if you're interested in also developing, for example, a one-pager on all the steps to take to be able to cast a ballot that counts, or something like that, we're more than happy to develop that with you. And then also virtual volunteer events. If you're interested in doing a text bank and reaching out to a specific demographic or area, right, that you want to reach out to, we're more than happy to work with you on either doing text banks, and we also do letter writing parties. So we actually do personalized letters to individuals, encouraging them to not just check their ID, but to actually go vote as well. Next slide. We can also do partnerships as direct voter contact partnerships. So if you have any kind of canvassing, phone banking, text banking, pledge cards, or you're out there in the community tabling, we can work with you to develop a program where if you add an ID question into your script, and oftentimes the simplest is the best. Do you have a state ID or driver's license? If they say no or they don't know, then we can talk about it and we can develop a system where you can send us the information of those voters, whether it's on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. And then we actually get staff and trained volunteers to do follow-ups with them. Now, if they respond and they said that they actually, they need their birth certificate or whatever it is that they need, then they are transferred into our voter ID assistance program, and we open up a case for them and we actually help them through the process. So if you are interested in potentially doing that, or if your program's a little bit different, just because whatever I'm saying isn't the only thing that we can do, we're always up for working with partners and starting new partnerships or new ways to be able to provide our resources. Next slide. And I did touch on this before already, but just to give you a little bit of more details, volunteer events, we can do them either virtually or in person. They can be letter writing parties, phone banks, text banks. We can also co-host them with, your organization if you'd like. And we do this year round. We always encourage people to do a Q&A. And encourage them to be able to join these and to do an ID check year round, because the first question I get is, how long does it take for you to help somebody? And the reality is that we don't know. It depends on the person where they are in the process. So the earlier they can do their ID check, the better. Next slide. We also have our helpline number, and I do apologize. I don't think these slides transferred all of the information, but I'll make sure that Courtney has the version where it actually has all of the details. We have our helpline number, which is fully bilingual. It's 866-ID, the number 2, and then vote. You can either call or text us there with whatever questions you may have, or if you need assistance. You can also go to votewriters.org/help. And you can also email us at info@votewriters.org. And you can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. I know a little dated with the Facebook, but some people still use it. You can actually get assistance through there as well. Next slide. We also do the voter ID assistance. So once an individual comes to us, whatever it is that they need, we help them. If you live in a state that has a voter ID law. So if you're in the 38 out of 50 states that have a voter ID law, we can help with the cost of getting your underlying documents, track down the documents. People sometimes even need legal assistance to make amendments to these documents. And so we do have individuals who are willing to take this pro bono. We do cover some reinstatement fees as well, because we know that that is a barrier sometimes. And we arrange transportation to and from the ID issuing office that they are going to go get their ID from. I do want to reiterate, we do offer transportation to the ID issuing office. I know that we get a lot of requests for the polls, and while we do provide that for the people that we helped in getting an ID, we don't provide that for everybody. Next slide. We also have our voter ID clinics, and these can be either recurring or they can be a one-off event. If you have a facility and you want to host a clinic, which essentially is a place where you can invite people to come and we start the intake process, so we can start a case with them and start helping them get their state identification, we can do it. We can do those either in person or virtually, and we cover the cost of the ID process itself. And if you're interested in getting more details on that, I will drop my email and you can email me directly. Next slide. We also, people can also refer voters to us. And again, these are the different ways that you can refer individual to us. What we do is you communicate with us. And if you say, hey, I want to be an official partner and send people to you, we add you to our Zendesk form, which is a platform, the secured platform that we use to have the information of the voters. And then we can start the partnership then. Next slide. And lastly, we also have some digital material. We do have, I know that I'm out of time, but we do have some specialized resources for trans and non-binary voters on how to change their gender marker, their name, things like that. We have specialized resources for student voters, so student IDs, are they accepted or not? And then also with voters with disabilities, because if they have some exceptions in your state, then there are some exceptions for voter ID laws as well. And I believe that is towards the end. But I will drop my email and I'll go ahead and take questions when we do the Q&A for the panel.
Thank you so much, Selene. These are just such incredible resources. I know many of our partners have used VoteRiders resources before, and it can be really transformative in helping people in your communities cast their ballots that count. So we've gotten a few great questions. We will circle back to those after our remaining panelists speak. And with that, I will pass it over to Marcos.
Thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Marcos. I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager at VoteER. Thank you again so much for giving us the opportunity to talk to you all a little bit about some of the resources and the work that we do here at VoteER. To keep it really simple, VoteER is helpful in providing nonpartisan healthcare-based civic engagement resources. So we're really looking to work with different people in the healthcare field, whether it's individual clinicians, professionals, hospitals, clinics, community health centers, or just community organizations in general, to really mobilize their patients and communities to register to vote and to show up to vote. So really excited again to have this conversation, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So something that I'd love to share a little bit more about myself actually is an experience as someone that grew up being a Medicaid recipient that really paints the picture of this link between voting and health. So picture this, I'm a 12-year-old student that's just recently entered 7th grade, and I have a single mother who is already struggling to make ends meet and is now worried about finding a way to get me orthodontic services. In my scenario specifically, because of the area I was in, there were no readily accessible clinics or dental offices that could provide these services and also accept my Medicaid benefits. And as a result, my mom ended up finding a clinic over 2 hours away in South Florida. Meanwhile, I thought I was the coolest kid because I got to skip school for almost half a day, go get my braces treatment, and come back and spend the rest of the day at home missing more class. In hindsight, obviously, that's not the best situation I would have wanted to be in. It would have been preferred that I've had treatment right there in Naples, where I'm originally from. And ultimately, I think it just goes to show how important that we have policies that are enacted by represented officials to hopefully support communities like the ones that I came from, right? From low-income communities. And ultimately, it's up to community members and organizations like you to really help folks get out there to register to vote and to show up to vote. So if we can go to the next slide. So now I'd really love to just paint some of the research that's available and shows this connection between voting and health. So this research here comes from one of our amazing partners, the Healthy Democracy, Healthy People. So this index specifically shows the relationship on a national level between states with a certain level of voting access and what their health outcomes are looking. So if you're looking at what this relationship actually is, we see that there's a positive relationship, right? So if there's more voting access, typically we're seeing better health outcomes. And if there's less voting access, we're seeing worse health outcomes. So this just goes to show how important it is for folks to actually vote, as it's typically resulting in healthier communities. Next slide, please. So we cannot begin to address the social determinants of health until we begin to address and point out our interventions towards the structural determinants of health, right? So voting is arguably one of the most important pieces to impacting these political determinants of health. So thinking back to the example, the life example that I gave you related to mine, voting has an opportunity to impact funding and so many other pieces of legislation that can ultimately impact community health. And it's such an important factor that helps really impact what health outcomes we're seeing day to day. Next slide, please. You might be wondering, how big is this issue of unregistered but eligible voters? Well, the fact and figure that we have here is that it's around 72 million people who are unregistered but eligible to vote. And that's nearly the entire population of France. I actually checked this morning, it's a little bit more than the population of France. So it just goes to show how massive this issue currently is here in the United States. Next slide. You might also be asking yourself, why are so many people unregistered to vote? Well, unfortunately, the main reason people are unregistered to vote is because they simply have never been asked to vote. A lot of the common ways people are registering to vote, I'm sure you have been prompted at your local DMV or another social service agency. Those two are the most common ways that folks are getting registered to vote. So next slide, please. So imagine a situation where we're bringing this opportunity into the healthcare setting. The truth is that we're having much more regular interactions with health professionals than we are with our local DMV or another social service agency. So it's really important to think about how we're really, creating this opportunity of asking people to register to vote in new spaces where it hasn't been done before. And when we're looking at that overlap between unregistered eligible voters and people that are currently most disinvested in by our current healthcare system, we can think of voters that are young, low income, and communities of color. Next slide, please. So how exactly does Votier help? So I firsthand have had a lot of experience helping some of our partners, whether they're healthcare clinics, healthcare systems, or professional associations, implement these resources. And I'm really excited to share a little bit more about what those resources exactly are. Next slide, please. So our tried and true resource is our badge and lanyards. So this is a really great resource for individuals that are looking to have something on hand to register folks. Essentially how it works, and this pertains to all of our resources actually, but with each resource, there's a QR code or a link individuals or community members can access. And this links them to nonpartisan voter registration resources through one of our partners, TurboVote. And it also links other really important resources, like some of VoteRiders resources as well, and other resources that help people really understand what's on their ballot and also how to actually get out there to vote. Secondly, if you're an organizational leader who's really interested in kind of doing this type of rollout across your organization, something that we offer for our organizations is our custom digital materials, which is essentially a suite of digital and printable materials that you can implement in a community space, a breakout room, a patient's visit room, or really any place where you can post a poster or leave handouts on a table. But ultimately, it works the same way our badges do. It's linking them to that super important information related to voter registration that's state specific, and it also links them to those voter education resources. Thirdly, if you're an organization that's interested in emailing a large listserv that you have, if you're able to text folks, whether they're members or community members that you're working with, we have plenty of language to help you get started. One of our most successful initiatives has been our community civic engagement program. And when they launched in 2020, they had actually tried out texting patients as the community health center being that trusted messenger. And ultimately, we saw more people getting registered to vote. So it's super important that individuals and organizations specifically are being the drivers and being that trusted messenger to get people to register to vote and to get out there to vote. Next slide, please. So all of our tools are undisruptive, optional, and nonpartisan. In regards to the healthcare setting, we completely understand there may be other patient priorities at that specific moment. So it's super important for us to understand that nonpartisan voter registration can be a piece of a patient's visit, and ultimately it's not something mandatory that has to happen. Next slide. Great, so we're going to move on to some legal FAQs, and these pertain particularly to our healthcare community. And if you can go to the next slide. So we're all familiar with the way that DMVs are equipped to register patients to vote. So why can't we do the same in our hospitals, healthcare clinics, and federally qualified health centers? So the truth is, voter registration really does belong in these different settings to, again, really bring that opportunity to get people to register to vote. So this is some of the guidance that we're seeing from the IRS and the Health Resources Services Administration, essentially really supporting this type of work, specifically in a nonpartisan manner, right? So you can essentially help people register to vote, hand out voter education materials, and again, inform folks of helping people to get out the vote or turning out to vote. Next slide, please. In the healthcare setting or a community setting, what this exactly means and how our tools apply. So you can point patients to voter posters, badges, or handouts. Secondly, we can also tell patients that an institution offers a service to help them register to vote, but of course doesn't necessarily endorse a political party. And thirdly, we can help patients fill out that registration form while of course remaining neutral. Next slide, please. So now I really want to invite you all to take the next step and really making sure that your community has a chance to register to vote and to also turn up to vote. So next slide, please. So the two resources that I had mentioned first are individual badges and our custom materials. Again, these are really great opportunities to help you, begin that conversation related to nonpartisan voter registration. A lot of the communities that you are working typically don't get this opportunity. So it's super important that we're creating this opportunity. And I'm really glad the organization that we're with today is opening up the door to providing these resources and more guidance with their toolkit. And then, yeah, I'll pass it over to your team.
Thank you so much, Marcos. These are all just really incredible resources, and VoteER has been a strong partner for us and an inspiration in a lot of the work that we're pursuing. So I appreciate your partnership and your time on this webinar today. Actually, I'm going to pass it over to Hillary from our team, who is stepping in very last minute. We had one panelist who was unfortunately sick and unable to make it today, but Hillary, who has joined us just a few weeks ago, can speak to this theme of partnerships through her work on campus. So with that, take it away, Hillary.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be on the call and to join the coalition as Our Homes Our Votes intern. So back on my campus, I do a lot of nonpartisan voter education and outreach work. And the super cool thing about my campus is that we actually have a coalition, a lot of different groups that work to kind of create this like positive voting experience for students so they can go on and become like lifelong voters. So I'm part of the coalition. It's called the UMich Votes Coalition because I go to U of M. And there's my group, which is Turn Up, Turn Out. And we are a student-led group that does a lot of nonpartisan work in the fields of voter registration, education, and voter turnout. There's also, we partner with the Ginsburg Center for Community Service and Learning. We also partner with the actual Ann Arbor City Clerk. They are really great partners because they make sure that we're always updating new election laws, for example, and always make sure that we get the registration forms that we need, stuff like that. We also work with two professors at the School of Art and Design at my college, and they actually create satellite clerk's offices on campus. So there is one at a museum on campus, and there's another one in a library on campus. And these satellite clerk's offices have been used for the midterms and the general elections as a way for students who choose to vote in the city of Ann Arbor to vote on campus, which makes voting more accessible for students. And we worked with the Ann Arbor City Clerk to kind of design and as well as like staff these satellite clerk's offices. And we also work with the administrators at it's called the University of Michigan Museum of Art, and then the Duderstadt Center. We work with these administrators at these two locations to ensure that we always have the spaces for satellite clerk's offices, and we can always make sure that voting is accessible to students on campus. And we have bi-weekly meetings, and we discuss how we can, register more students, help students connected with nonpartisan voter guides, for example, which I know the coalition provides, for example. So it's a very multifaceted group that we have, but it's really great to know that there's a lot of different partners on campus that we can work, that my student group can work with to ensure that students always have the information they need to vote, both in the city of Ann Arbor and also outside of the city of Ann Arbor and across the entire in their home state, for example. If they're an out-of-state student, we provide voting information, not just for students that come from the state of Michigan, but students that also come from California, for example. So really, truly working to help every student that, is eligible to vote and have the nonpartisan voting information so they can be informed about their vote. And just ensuring that voting is always accessible on campus. So yeah, that's kind of how my school has a kind of coalition style to community partnerships in the voting sphere.
Thank you so much, Hillary. And I really appreciate how creative those partnerships are outside of the box. You might not think that the museum or kind of the art department would be involved, but it is an all hands on deck effort, especially as it pertains to making voting part of the student culture. So we appreciate that work and are very lucky to have you on our Homes Are Votes team this summer. I'm now going to call all of our panelists back up for some questions. We've gotten some really great ones. I'm going to try to hit as many of them as possible in our remaining time. A few questions for Selene. We got kind of two logistical questions that I saw about the voter ID information cards. One is, do you have cards available in Braille? And the second is, can churches order cards?
So our cards right now are not available in Braille. However, that is something that we're looking to see. So if whoever asked the question or anybody else has resources that could be helpful to us to be able to advance that, that would be great. And yes, churches can definitely order our cards as long as you're a 501c3 or you act as a nonpartisan organization or nonpartisan, not, advocating for any candidate or political party. Even if you don't have a C3 status, if you go online and order our cards, there's a small box that you check that it says that you operate as a nonprofit or as a nonpartisan entity. And that would allow you to get these cards completely free of charge. If you are a C4 or you are a partisan organization or a for-profit organization, you can also email me. These cards are digital as well, and they're available to everybody. So you could also print and share those, but we would not be able to cover the cost.
Thank you, Selene. A question that we got for Marcos is, can non-healthcare workers get Vote ER badges too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I even saw someone in the chat messaging that they were a part of a church community. We even have folks like that who are ordering resources. So it necessarily doesn't have to be someone that's in the healthcare community. These resources are free and available for anyone to order. So I absolutely recommend you and invite you to get those resources for yourself and your community as well.
Thank you. We got a question from Jimmy in Colorado. I think that's directed towards Selene. If we have a clinic address where unhoused people get their mail, can we use it to get them birth certificates or ID cards?
Yes, so please contact me if you are interested in doing this. I can get you in touch with our voter ID assistance team. And we do that. We also have PO boxes where we can receive them for the individuals. And then we can give them a call and let them know once we have it. So we can definitely find a way to do that. And if we can use your organization as a partnership to do that, we're more than happy to do so.
Great, thank you. We got a great question from Tiffany regarding the kind of people's voting rights and the costs of obtaining voter ID, specifically for unhoused people. And Tiffany asked, isn't it depriving people, especially unhoused people, of their rights when there are fees to obtain documents? So if any of our speakers want to talk about kind of that process and how that may violate people's rights, or how your organizations step in to help people who are facing those barriers.
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, it's no secret, right? The fact that you have to get an ID, every state that has a voter ID law is actually required to also have a free identification and trying to take away that barrier. That is in theory, but in practice, it's very different. I am based out of Texas, and I can tell you that that ID that they offer, I still have to provide the same documents as if I'm getting a state ID. I just don't have to pay for it, which at that point, is it really accessible, right? There are some states where if there is, they do have programs if somebody is unhoused or something like that, that they may be able to cover it or waive it. But it varies state by state, and honestly, sometimes even county by county, how it's enforced and things like that. So for us, depending on where this individual is at, our partners, we work with them closely. Again, if they live in a state that has a voter ID law, we cover those costs. So the cost for your birth certificate, the Social Security cards are free, but even the transportation there, sometimes there could be some reinstatement fees. We don't cover all of them, but there is a list of those that we're able to cover. So we try to combat that by having our funds and continue to fundraise to be able to assist individuals with that. Our organization also, all our policy is for an ID to be able to vote, but we also cover, for example, birth certificates. Sometimes you need them for your kids, so for minors, for housing. So we actually even cover those because we understand that it's something that you need for housing, and it's something that it's a little bit outside of our realm, but we're happy to do it because we understand the impact that it's taking on individuals' lives.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that intersection is really important to uplift, where vote riders may be focused on getting IDs for the purposes of voting, but the benefits of that extend far beyond voting, and housing security is often kind of enabled by having that access to ID. I'm seeing a question from Tiffany, that a kind of a follow-up question that I wanted to ask as well about how to fight this, specifically in her home state of Oregon, but I'll extend that to nationwide. Are there ways to get involved in changing policies so that, to reduce the need for this support and to enable voters to access the ID, or even to reduce those ID barriers that prevent many voters from casting their ballots?
For sure. Well, we focus on the practical matters of, hey, this is what we have today, and let's work around it to make sure it's accessible. There is, in an ideal world, there would be no voter ID laws, right? But if there is, at the minimum, expanding the list of identifications. I think that if you look at different states and you look at the list that they accept, you can definitely see where there's some intention in who, on creating barriers for certain demographics, right? Again, I can speak from Texas because this is where I'm at. You can use your handgun license, but you can't use your student ID from any institution anywhere, right? So you are, you know, in looking at this, I think that one, of course, right, with policy and at a minimum, extending the list and also the expiration dates, I think that that could also be a game changer. But also, especially for student IDs and things like that, some student IDs aren't accepted because they have to have specific information, which means that either the university system or the university itself has to redesign that. So working a little bit more locally with campuses to make sure that that's something that's taken care of if that is one of the issues. And getting involved, right? Letting people know. We have our voter ID information cards. You know, they're for organizations. If you're affiliated with an local organization, or if you are a leader of the community and you say, hey, I'm not gonna, you can let us know that you're not going to necessarily like be affiliated with a political party, but you want to, you know, let people know, let your neighbors know, people in your community know. You can definitely use our resources to just get the word out there. I think that not enough people talk about it. One of the things that I always say is we always talk about voter registration and then a plan to vote. But in between, if you don't have in voter registration, if you don't talk about ID already, even if a person has a plan to vote, when they're going to go, everything, but they don't have an acceptable ID, they're not going to be able to execute that plan, right? And if they are, they may have to cast a provisional ballot, and that just means that you added a whole nother step of them having to go back, cure their ballot, and do what they need to do. And the likelihood of people actually doing that is slim to none, unfortunately. So really being intentional when talking to individuals. For us also, if you're a direct service provider, putting it in your intake form, start talking to people about it. You may not talk to them about voter ID for voting, but you need an ID, right? Housing, employment. In Texas, even, you know, even the fact that you're not able to self-identify can be criminalized at this point. So really encourage you to start that conversation. And then eventually we connect the dots for those people that are just trying to survive on a daily basis and encourage them to get involved civically a little bit more.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, that the kind of wave of stricter voter ID laws really came about after the Supreme Court gutted protections under the Voting Rights Act that had prevented jurisdictions with a history of discriminating specifically against voters of color. There had been this kind of federal protection against those sorts of discriminatory laws, and then that was struck down, and states kind of took that as a green light to pass discriminatory voter ID laws that have this disproportionate impact on low-income communities and communities of color. So it really is kind of a live civil rights issue, and I know that there are many policy and advocacy organizations we partner with that are trying to bring those voting rights protections back and make them stronger at the federal level. We also got a question in the Q&A about voting rights for returning citizens. The question is, if someone was convicted of a nonviolent felony offense 20 or more years ago, do they have voting rights, or is there a way to restore those rights? Apologies if the answer varies by state. This is one where the answer will vary by state, as is the case with many voting laws. I can drop a link in the chat to a resource that summarizes state-specific laws regarding returning citizens and voting, and I'll open it up if any of our panelists want to chime in there as well. Here's a link from the National Conference of State Legislatures that breaks it down by state. One question that I wanted to ask Marcos is if you would speak for a minute about Civic Health Month and how Civic Health Month can be an opportunity for partnership and getting more involved with this intersection of health and voting. Yeah,
that's an excellent question. So Civic Health Month is a month which is a holiday that happens throughout the month of August. It's essentially a time where a lot of our partners and organizations come together to either host events, voter registration drives, and really share out materials related to nonpartisan voter registration. Folks that decide to get involved in Civic Health Month are civic health partners, and these partners commit to different actions throughout the year. One of those actions being sending a mass email to your membership or to your listserv to get people to register to vote. So we, in addition to Civic Health Month, being a civic health partner also means celebrating, National Voter Registration Day, National Voter Education Week, Vote Early Day, all of these civic holidays that are really supporting our efforts to both register people to vote and to get people out there to vote. But if you're interested in being a civic health partner and participating in these different holidays, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat below. And we'd love for you to help, support this idea of creating more opportunities to get people registered to vote. And you can find that link down below.
Thank you so much. I also see we've gotten a few questions for the NLIHC team regarding having a webinar in Spanish, as well as some very important suggestions for making this webinar more accessible. I will say that for this year, we don't have any plans to conduct a webinar fully in Spanish, but we do have some bilingual resources coming online on our website that I will share in just a few minutes. We also can download the transcripts of the webinars to make it easier to translate them. But I really appreciate this feedback, and I would love for that to be something we can offer in future years. Regarding accessibility, we will absolutely download and email the chat to attendees as well as the slides and have those posted on our website. I know that can be really critical for accessibility, and thank you for pointing that out. And please continue to send me suggestions for accessibility. I will drop my email in the chat. We always want those suggestions. We want to make these webinars as accessible as possible. And again, greatly appreciate that feedback. Let me see if there are any other questions for our panelists. I think that covers all of the questions that I'm seeing. Again, please feel free to email me and to email our panelists with any follow-ups. With that, I'm going to transition into a few closing announcements about opportunities to get involved with Our Homes, Our Votes beyond this webinar, and some ways to check out new resources that we have. First, we have an Our Homes, Our Votes affiliates network. This is a group that is open to all nonpartisan organizations that share the campaign's goals. We have regular office hours. We have an email listserv. Our next office hours are this Friday from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you are an affiliate, you'll get the link to register for those. Affiliates will also get some enhanced access to Our Homes, Our Votes tools and resources. And we will drop that link to sign up as an affiliate. That's a great way to stay involved beyond attending the webinars. We can go to the next slide. We also have a group called the Housing Providers Council. This is a group of developers, property managers, and resident services staff that are committed to boosting voter turnout among their residents. This group meets every other month to share best practices in resident voter engagement, to exchange resources. So if this would be a good fit for your group, I encourage you to apply. We will drop that link in the chat as well. I also wanted to share an important new resource that we have. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. If you weren't on the webinar last time, we talked about this a little bit, but I'll just do a little recap. We have a new online resource called TurboVote, which is a one-stop shop where voters can register to vote, update their voter registration, check their voter registration status, sign up for election reminders, and find nonpartisan election information for their community. If you need to update your voter registration, you can check this out. And it's also a great way to promote voter registration in your own networks, both online and in person. So highly encourage you to check that out. If you have any questions about best practices for using TurboVote, you can reach out to us, and we'll also share a link that has some good guidance on using TurboVote and incorporating that into your outreach. We can go to the next slide. We also have a very comprehensive online Our Homes, Our Votes resource library at ourhomes-ourvotes.org. We are also bringing some new resources online throughout this election cycle, so I highly recommend checking that out. I'll also highlight some new resources that we have as this webinar series continues, as we'll be having many more resources coming online over the next few months. We can go to the next slide. This is our brand new Our Homes, Our Votes voter pledge card. This is designed so that organizations that are assisting with voter registration can follow up with potential voters, and those voters can keep track of their pledge to vote as a reminder and to help them make a voting plan. So we have this on our website. We'll share the link to that. And this is also a bilingual resource. We have this available in both English and Spanish on our website. I also think I forgot to mention that TurboVote is bilingual. From that same link at the bottom, you can click Espanol and it will then all translate into Spanish. And throughout the course of this year, as we're publishing new resources, we will be making those available in Spanish as well. We can go to the next slide. I also just want to plug, I know we talked about this on the last webinar, but in case anyone is new or missed it, National Voter Registration Day is rapidly approaching. This is a great opportunity to be part of a nationwide nonpartisan movement to increase voter registration and turnout in your communities. And community partners of National Voter Registration Day will receive free swag as well as online webinars and digital assets. It's a really great resource, a really kind of accessible way to facilitate voter registration in your community. And you can sign up on the link that Hillary just shared in the chat. We can go to the next slide. And I also want to give a little preview of the next webinar. It's going to be structured a bit differently from the others, and I'm really excited about it. The topic is tenant organizing and elections, and we will have a roundtable with 5 leaders from the Minneapolis High Rise Representative Council, which is the umbrella organization of public housing resident councils in Minneapolis high rises. They've been really all-stars in resident voter engagement and getting their neighbors registered and mobilized to vote. So we'll hear from them about some of the secrets to their success and how they're building enthusiasm around voting among public housing residents in this election cycle. We can go to the next slide. Again, just a reminder that this webinar is one of 16 that we're conducting throughout this year. You can preview all of the agendas and descriptions of the webinars at the link that Hillary just dropped in the chat. We excited to keep seeing you on here and to keep the learning going. We can go to the next slide. I think that might bring us to the end. So I will check through and see if there are any remaining questions. But if not, thank you all so much for being here today, for your thoughtful comments, and I'll be sure to download the chat, include that in the follow-up email, as well as the slides and the recording and the transcript. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists and to Hillary for hopping on last minute. Really appreciate that.